get a couple of minutes earlier than usual because this is the first time we're in this classroom for this semester, and there is a class right at 1 o'clock. So we just want to make sure we give our speaker the full time for today. As you get set up, I'll do a brief introduction. Just to start off, this event is not only a MISC event, but it's also co-sponsored by ESCAPE, or the Center for Ethics, Society, and Computing. So thank you, ESCAPE, for this co-sponsorship. Today we have Alex Taylor speaking with us on living a larger life together. So Alex is a sociologist working in the Center for Human-Centered Design at City University of London. His research unpacks a range of technology in everyday life to speculative design interventions, both large and small. Across these realms, he draws on a feminist technoscience to ask questions about the co-constitutive roles human-machine composites play in forms of knowing and being, and how they might open up possibilities for fundamental transformations in society. Most recently, he's begun to wonder about the abilities of humans and non-humans together and to speculate on hybrid compositions that enlarge capacity and offer the chance of something different, something more. So fun fact, Alex has been to SI and North Quad and Ann Arbor before, back in 2017, so was able to find the room just well, which is fascinating. So with that, join me in welcoming Alex.
Thank you so much, Robin. And Robin and I worked together remotely while we were both visiting researchers at Google. Jay is now visiting Google as well. Jay, have you actually been there, or are you all doing? Okay. Yeah. And I know Jay is on straight after me, so I have to try and keep this somewhat short. So I wanted to talk about just an idea really that's been sort of weighing on me, if you like, for maybe the last 3 or 4 years. And the title of the talk is maybe a little bit grand, but I just want to start thinking about a much more expansive idea of agency, action, and interaction, and one that I think, although I'm not totally confident, pushes up against some of the ideas that dominate our thinking in areas like interaction design and human-computer interaction. The very idea of human-centered design to me is something I struggle with. Why are we talking about human-centered? And although a lot of energy has been put into centering the human in the design of technology, I want to ask the question, maybe it's time to be thinking in a slightly different way. And maybe that's a sacrilege in HCI, but hopefully you'll bear with me. Just to double check, I've got on my Zoom recording, I can see a big banner, Zoom banner across the screen. Does anyone see the Zoom recording? Is that still the case for those people who are on Zoom? I have got the chat. Okay, it still looks good. Okay, I'm hoping that's okay. The other thing I want to say is this talk is obviously just one thread of thinking from me. I ask you to go to Jay's talk afterwards for another thread of thinking that Jay, myself, and Daniela Rosner have been involved in thinking about design justice, questions of design justice and race, and integrating it with Black studies. So this is very much a way of thinking about human-computer interaction design and interaction design and technology in a broader sense. And Jay's talk will be much more specific about some of the threads of thinking we've been doing together. So I want to start with a video from YouTube. And so one of my little obsessions, nightly obsessions, is to watch animal videos on YouTube. So let me just play this to you. And I want you to think about what's going on here between these two animals. The title of the YouTube clip is "The Last Type of Friendship Between a Rhinoceros and a Sheep." I don't think it's a sheep, I think it's probably a goat, but you can decide on that. Okay, I just want us to think, what's going on here? So we've got two species, a goat-sheep and a rhinoceros. And if we were to follow sort of the established way of thinking on the conventions in animal studies, we say that this shouldn't be happening. That sheep don't have the cognitive abilities to be doing what I see going on here. I'm not sure if everyone else sees it, but a goat teaching a rhinoceros how to jump. And in a playful way, there's a playful interaction between these two actors. And so on the one hand, we have the conventions of an area of study, animal studies, in which actors, in this case, particular species, are defined by, for example, their brain size, their weight, their cognitive capacities, their physical manifestation. And on the other hand, we have a social media platform or video platform that is full of examples of animals, multi-species relations commingling like this. What's going on here? I want us to ask, this is a question that I want us to ponder on together today. And as Vincent Dupre, the critical animal studies scholar, writes, the question here is which hypothesis is the most interesting? That of an animal strictly determined by its hormones and by its hierarchical rules, fighting blindly for problems of competition, or that of an animal articulating its body to other bodies in the spirit of coordination. So Dupre invites us to think about this established or conventional way of thinking on the one hand versus a much more, if I would like to call it, expansive way of thinking about relationships in which we might become together in our relations. You know, the relationship we saw there didn't precede that moment. It happened because of that moment, in that moment. So that their capacities, if you like, become together, the rhinoceros and the goat, become because they are together in that moment. So as I've said, what I want to question is whether notions like human-centeredness, ideas like mediation that are so central to human-computer interaction, and things like augmentation, all about this premise that somehow the actor is at the center, defined by, for example, their cognitive abilities, or by their physical manifestation, and their actions are mediated with the technology. And so they extend themselves out because of that technology. Their agency is extended because or through that technology. And to my mind, that's a very utilitarian way of thinking about the human as an actor. And it's very focused on this idea of individualism, human individualism, or even exceptionalism, that somehow the human is the center of everything, and that we enable ourselves through technology. And I really think that there are other ways to be thinking about what technology might do in our relationships between both other human actors and other non-human actors. So in thinking about this idea of what we might call an entangled becoming, I want to just talk through two examples of my research. I don't have the time to go into much depth with them, but hopefully I'll sort of give you enough of a flavor of what I'm trying to think about here. So the first of these projects is a project that I started when I was working at Microsoft Research. I've continued to work on this project. It's probably a project that has changed my mind about VR technology. So I really I'm not convinced by VR. I know that's probably sacrilege as well. But when I was introduced to this technology and worked on the project, it really kind of shifted my thinking about what VR or augmented reality might offer people. So in this case, we built a HoloLens system for a young boy. It was an entirely bespoke version of the HoloLens for one person. The young boy at the time was 14. I'm going to call him TH for the purposes of this talk. TH has been blind from birth. He's now about 17, I think. And we spent a lot of time working with him, building this system. And one of the things that we wanted to do was design a system that aided him in understanding what we call social geography. There's a real premise to why we did this I don't have time to get into, but what the simple way of thinking about it is that one of the things that many people with vision impairments told us they struggled with was getting a sense of who's in a room with them. And we just wanted to think, is there any way we can help people with that fairly kind of simple, straightforward problem? And the thing that really captured that for me, this is a problem for me, was that, again, a number of people told us that when they're in conversations with interlocutors and they can't see them, for example, they have some kind of vision impairment, those interlocutors may just leave them, walk away mid-conversation or at some point in the conversation. They're just not aware that they've left the vicinity that they're in. And I just feel like, you know, if we can just help people in that simple way of sort of getting a sense of who's around them, then we may have provided some kind of assistance. As I've said, this is a really highly customized tool. It probably does have some general implications, and it is being trialed now in a wider context in schools. Again, young people using them. What I want to show you is this tool. This is one of the first times it was deployed in the wild. It's currently been developed to a point where it is all fully embedded within the HoloLens system and a mobile device. In this occasion, there's a big fat computer sat off screen that's running the software. You'll see that TH is here. He's wearing the HoloLens system. This is clearly a mealtime. I'm just going to run the video. The volume's purposely low at this stage. And what you see here is our desktop version of how the system is operating. What we get is a cone in which TH can orient his head, and anytime someone enters that cone, their name gets called out to him. And there's some sort of spatial representation of the acoustics as well. So he has a sense of who's in the space. So if you think about it, anytime that you move your head and face it in a particular direction, that person's name gets called out. If that person moves into the cone, that person's name gets called out. For those of you who have been somewhat involved, either peripherally or in the development of machine learning computer vision systems, you'll realize very quickly how such a simple technology is actually an incredibly complicated one, because you've got a continually evolving model, which is this thing of actors in space, and your point source is always changing. So that model continually needs to be updated. And you are at no time confident of the actors in the space. So that sometimes you may get misrecognitions, for example. In the case of the HoloLens system, a misrecognition or a non-recognized human is just given an audio thump, if you will. So you know that they're there, but you don't know that they are. So, you know, this took us about 2, maybe 3 years to develop to the point where we see it here. We did it entirely in collaboration with TH. I'm going to think what I've not said. Okay, what I want to do is show you a clip of something that really is, to me, astounding in terms of what this tool does. So let me just play the clip. Now, actually, what I'll briefly say what happened. So TH's grandmother walks around the table to TH, offers him some water, and they will be asking, so because it's the first time it's been used in anger, so to speak, they're asking him, what's happening? Can you hear us? Can you see us? Etc. And then someone else called Martin walks into the space, and TH recognizes that Martin's entered the space. That is exactly what this system has been designed for. And the delight that you see on Cecily's face, who's my collaborator, is indicative of how excited we were when this happened. Okay, so there's Cecily about to have a huge grin. She's just, this is what we've been working towards for 3 years. And TH recognizes that someone has come into the room where obviously he cannot see, he has no vision, recognizes that someone has come into the room and calls out the fact, now it's Martin. So they're asking him, who are you seeing? Now, what we could say here is that we've built a miraculous technological intervention, that the technology has done what it has been designed to do. However, there's a couple of other things that are going on here. What TH has started to do, and he continues to do today, is that when he uses where's the system, he orients his head like this. He's continually moving his head like this. And the reason for that is it triggers this cone. So he's, if you like, he's searching a room and searching a sort of space in a room to trigger the cone to call out whether someone is there or not to him. So I suppose the question for me, first of all, is where's the system? Is it the Hololens? Is it TH? Of course, it's TH and the Hololens. That TH has adopted a mode of interaction with the world. In fact, he does this without the HoloLens system now, of nodding his head like so, to get the system to, if you like, see for him. And so this is where we get this sort of, if you like, becoming entanglement, this entangled becoming between the machine and the human. That something more is happening because of the relationship between them. Something else has come to be because of what both are capable of. So just some kind of freeze frames of TH doing this nodding interaction. In this case, he's doing it into his grandmother's stomach, so it's not working. So then he has to look up and do it then. But while he's doing it, he then sees Martin enter the room. So we get this, now it's Martin. So this is my, if you like, my first invitation to be thinking about the more than human, if you like, and these entangled relationships between actors is that, as I said, TH and the HoloLens are doing something more together. What was also happening, of course, is that the other people in the room were behaving differently. That they're starting to understand that they get recognized in certain ways. Later on, they go on to talk about, well, can you see me if I'm standing up? Or if I'm sitting, can you tell if I'm sitting down? What we found in his school, when TH wears this to school, is that his friends start to orient to him in a different way, to be seen by the HoloLens system. So again, we have to ask the question, where's the system? Is it the HoloLens system? Is it TH? Is it his friends, his family? Is it somehow the space in which they're all interacting together in? And so, you know, my question, I suppose my thinking here is, well, it's all of those things, and that we need to be thinking about the relations, the entangled relations between all actors, and understand what they bring, what they constrain, etc., to these relationships. So just to kind of, as I said, we spent a long time both building this system and analyzing its use. That kind of video analysis that I only briefly touched upon here, that I know some of you will be familiar with, some kind of interaction analysis, or Vishnath and I were talking about methodologies, so that kind of thinking around methods and understanding interaction at a very detailed level. We spent a lot of time looking at video in that way. But I think the thing that I just want to draw attention to today for the purposes of having a short talk is, can we think about capacities not as some sort of reductive way, as though we might think of someone as having an absence of ability, but in a much more expansive way, that human abilities are continually expanding because of the things that we have around us, and that those things, of course, also start to become more through our interactions with them. And that's what I mean about an expansive idea of interaction and human behavior and agency, that actors of all kinds, whether they be goats, rhinos, young boys, etc., become more because of their relations with the world that they're interacting in. And I think that kind of shifts the emphasis on how we might think about human-computer interaction. So the second thing that I want to talk about is very closely related to and builds on some of the work that I did while I was a visiting researcher at Google. Robin was involved in some very closely related work as well. So many of you, I won't need to introduce technologies like ChatGPT to you, or GPT-3, or in Google's case, Lambda. And we know there's been some mistakes with Google, but we could have equally seen mistakes with ChatGPT. And I probably won't need to tell many of you, although maybe not all of you will know this, that these technologies, although we might see in their public relations how incredible they are as standalone technologies, that they rarely need any human intervention. Of course, the truth is that they need lots of human intervention. That, of course, there's people building the models, put a great deal of thought into the kind of algorithms and models that they're using to build these models, etc. And the thing I'm particularly interested in is that humans are involved in the annotation of data to help train these models. For example, in labeling things as harmful or toxic, etc. So there's a Times article that some of you probably will have seen, in which they talk about some of the labeling work that's being done in Africa to help, specifically help ChatGPT avoid toxic and harmful language. So this is some work that I've been involved in for probably the last 3 years, in which we have been doing a variety of things. I just want to give you 3 examples of work that I've been involved in. One is a study of practitioners, and this is the one I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. One is some work that we did to collect a data set of annotated data from, I think it's, I got the number up there, 40 raters. So we've got 990 conversations that have been labeled by 40 raters, roughly 990,000 labels of harm and toxicity of that data. And this is the kind of data that gets used to train large language models like ChatGPT or GPT-3. We've been looking at this data to see what role the diversity of the annotator might play on labeling harm and toxicity for training language models. This is an amazing example of something that the industry doesn't do. Ordinarily, they will use about probably 3 labelers to annotate data to train a system. 3, because 1's not enough. 2, what happens when you have some kind of disagreement? So they need 3. It astounded me when we worked at Google and I found out that 3 was the kind of convention for data. And then this last project is an incredible project that I'm doing with my PhD student, Shravya. She's been doing field work in South India in data centers. This particular picture is a generic picture of the web that she's been looking at. One of the areas she's been looking at is Tilda shopping. I don't know if you have it in Ann Arbor, but Amazon Fresh, we call it in the UK. I don't know what you call it here, where you go in and you can buy stuff without the checkout. So of course, Amazon tells us how incredible these technologies are, that they require very little human intervention, etc. And what Shravya has done, it's not Amazon, I should say, but it's a similar shop. It's found a room within one of these data centers in which there is a 24-hour monitoring of these checkout shops. And they do what's called exception handling. And it turns out, and none of you here will be surprised at this, it's really difficult to do this, because what happens when you go shopping with a family? Who's doing the purchasing? What happens because all these things are about monitoring what comes off a shelf. Well, once something's come off a shelf, then where does it go? So you need someone human to follow that person and say, this is a group of people. What happens when you reach into a shelf and you pick something out that wasn't actually meant to be there, like it's got a Pepper can instead of a Coca-Cola can? And so there's an incredible amount of human labor going into this cashless shopping. Again, I'm not going to talk about that today, although I'd be happy to talk about it more in question time. What I do want to talk about is very briefly, too briefly, is one of the projects that I've been involved in with Shivani and Ding Wang, both at Google, where we've been interviewing practitioners, those people who build machine learning systems, and asking them about what they do to deal with questions of diversity, particularly around annotated diversity. Do they seek out diversity in their annotators? Does anyone want to have a guess at what the kind of answer is to that? Do they seek out diversity in their annotators? Okay, no, they don't. Yeah, the overarching answer to that is no. Diversity. However, when you do talk to them about it, of course, many of these people are highly educated and have quite a sophisticated understanding of the data sets that they are compiling, and understand that diversity should in fact matter. But there's this sense that actually pragmatics outweigh questions of diversity. That we just need to build a system to get it to work because your company wants you to, or you need to buy a paper, or whatever it might be. So in a paper that's going to be presented at CHI this year, Shivani, Ding, and myself have written about this idea of regimes of existence, which borrows on a science and technology study scholars, Genevieve Thiel's idea that there are these forms of logic, or if you like, even ontologies that prevail in various scientific practices. And Genevieve Thiel is actually talking about winemaking and this idea of terroir, the sort of the earthiness or the taste of wine that has been written out of wine tasting because it's not something that you can scientifically measure. And likewise, our argument is there's a regime of existence, if you will, in machine learning in which the richness of a diversity, the idea of diversity gets written out of building, in this case, large language models, because it's not something that is easily monitored. And when it is, it gets treated in an incredibly homogeneous way. So let me just give you a couple of quotes that hopefully illustrate this. So these are quotes from the people we've interviewed. In this case, it's the chief science officer at a startup. And one of the things that they say is that at an early stage, we're trying to just make a product work in general. And I'm sure we've all heard or been involved in projects that are like this. It's just this pragmatic problem of, can we get something to work? And this is what we talk about as this sort of pragmatism that overrides everything else. that there's no time to deal with questions of diversity. And so when some of you nodded to the question of, well, are people dealing with diversity? It's not because they're not aware of it, it's just because they just don't have the time to deal with it. And because, if you like, that idea of having 3 people doesn't allow for dealing with diversity, really. And then there's this other sort of thing going on here, which is what they talk about is it's always about trying to satisfy the needs of the largest groups of people. And as a sociologist, what I would come to think of, what I think is going on there is a logic of representationalism, that you can get this excellent group of people to represent a much larger group of people. You know, this is the canonical idea of science, that somehow one group could be representative of many people. And this is what I think this logic indicates, is this mutual representation of a prevailing logic of 10 people representing 100, 100 people representing 1,000, whatever it might be. And maybe we can get enough of a diversity in that subset to be representative of a population. But I think we all intuitively know there's something amiss in that. What gets missed out when we sort of deal in that representationalness logic? So there are a number of things that are going on in data labeling that I think are kind of indicative of this idea of representation. So when we talk about the design of labeling or annotation tasks themselves, one interviewee talks about it being very hard to answer in a biased way. They design the task so they can't be answered in a biased way. But the tasks are so reductive that they can only be answered with a yes or a no, or maybe sometimes an unsure. That's all the options they have. And so the scope for any kind of independent thinking is so limited. The scope for demonstrating how your own personal experiences might matter are so incredibly limited that you can only answer yes, no, maybe if you're lucky, unsure. How can you possibly show what diversity might matter, how diversity might matter in a, for example, labeling a conversation as being toxic or harmful? And so there are a number of things that get done in standardizing the task. So you standardize the actual experiment. Of course, many of us being experimentalists will be familiar with that. You have this idea of majority vote, 2 outweighs 1. If you've got 2, 3 people labeling a conversation, if you get 2 labeling it as toxic, then it's toxic. You aim for some notion of ground truth. Now, that's not truth in some philosophical sense. No one believes that. But it's still this sort of ideal gold standard that drives any other kind of metric or measurement of a data set. And this all, if you like, feeds into this idea that the data set and its annotations are somehow representative of a larger or wider population. Something else, another interviewer said is, it's less about choosing the right raters and more about ensuring that they have that standardized understanding. So a great deal of effort goes into training these annotators for labeling the data. You're training them to see the conversation in the right way. Again, you're trying to kind of mitigate diversity here. You're trying to say any difference in opinion that you might have should, in a sense, be trained out of you. So you have to start to wonder who this actor is that's annotating a conversation, because you've taught them not to see it through their own, if you like, perspective, through the very thing that you might be seeking to, if you like, give emphasis to, their diversity. You're trying to mitigate by designing a study and designing the training, etc., to avoid that kind of diversity from the very beginning. And so, as I've said, we get this representation logic that leaves no room for diversity. So very briefly then, I just want to say that there's a logic and that there are structures in place that reinforce the homogeneity of our annotators. That there's a very narrow scope of possibilities to get the output to represent any kind of idea of diversity. Everything has been put in place at a structural level to not allow for diversity to be accounted for. And so although our interviewees and practitioners might be aware of problems of diversity in their annotators not being captured in the data set, they've done everything they can not to see it there. And this is endemic in how these data sets are produced. So in the paper we will present at CHI this year, we write, the approach to diversity and proportionate representation assumes a neutral topology of categories, that all categories are somehow the same and can be labeled evenly by annotators, that exist outside the power structures that marginalize, discriminate, and exploit. Somehow the things that might shape who we are, that place us either in the center or margins of society, have already been erased from the possibility of being captured by the data set. And so you get this perverse or paradoxical situation in which we all know about the problems of diversity in human experience. And yet the thing that we sort of we're mitigating in the data set is the possibility of capturing that. So that to me sets up a set of questions. How might we reconfigure the relationships between, in this case, annotators and the conversations that they annotate? Rethink the task, if you like. Rethink the way in which diversity is somehow represented or expressed through the task. What scope is there to build data sets that account for the diversity of human judgment and expression? I really don't think that any form of diversity of expression is allowed for in the annotation of data. If we're faced with yes, no, and unsure answers as the only options, how can we possibly show what our human experience is how our human experience is impacting on our answers? Can we think expansively about what people are capable of in data annotation? And that relationship between annotating a conversation and ourselves, what else can we capture that might allow us to inform a much richer conversational model or language model? And can we move beyond a neutral idea of diversity, where it's just some notion of population counts with respect to what we believe to be the population distribution in society, to think with a justice-directed intersectional orientation. So it's actually incumbent on us, I think, to think beyond mere representation and think, what else might we do to, if you like, deal with questions of justice, that we might prioritize other kinds of communities in the labeling and annotation of data. And this reflects some of the work that Robin has been involved in, where you get other communities annotating and collaborating on the annotation of data. So just in closing, I just wanted to sort of stand back a bit again and come back to this question of an expansive idea of capacity, people's capacities and other kinds of actors' capacities. So what do the conditions make possible? To me, that, I suppose, is the central question. So rather than thinking about human actors individually and their individual capacities or lack of capacities, what are the conditions of the many different sources of agency, whether they be human, non-human, things that are somehow setting up the conditions for what is possible? And we've seen something like that with TH and the Hololens system. Something that might have been considered impossible becomes possible because of the relations between TH and the Hololens system and those he interacts with. Do they make possible the chance for something that is more than the possibility of a more interesting becoming with, a becoming with that enlarges our capacities, that makes us more than who we are, not defined by being human, but defined by, if that's a term, by being what we're capable of in a setting, in a set of conditions. So not reducing our capacities, which I find something that we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about in areas like HCI or psychology, but living a larger life together, becoming more than who we are. So that is perhaps what my grand title alludes to, is that hope for the design and thinking of technology in the sense of being more than, being expansive, and thinking about what we might do to design technologies to be more than human and to be more than who we are. Thank you very much, everyone.
We have time for questions. And that's also on Zoom.
Yeah, and your labeling, it seems like you're complaining about two rejections. One is that we only ask the labeler for one bit of information. They form a lot more fine-grained opinion than just yes or no. And then a second rejection, that when we ask multiple people, all we care about is the vote of the distribution, the majority vote, rather than the whole distribution. And I wonder how much of your concern is coming from the second part versus the first. Suppose a few people have started doing this, is to say, the ground truth is not the majority vote. The ground truth is the distribution of votes. Yeah. If you just did that, but you still only ask people for binary answer or multiple choice answer, would that be enough for you, or do you really want to get the full response of the review?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So particularly that second project is very kind of fresh to me, and I've not really had enough time to think about it in terms of this broader argument. So thank you for sort of separating those out. That helps me. I agree with you. I think there are those two things that are going on. And so for those who are remote, there's both the kind of the problem of one person having a limited set of choices that might not be indicative of their experience. And there's secondly, the question of how can a ground truth be representative of something much, much more than what gets labeled in a data set. And maybe there are other ways to I guess, algorithmically capture that kind of data that might be distributions rather than binaries. Or so the latter, I fully agree with. I think we are seeing signs of new kinds of modeling techniques that handle distribution rather than binary. Although that is very much on the fringes from my understanding. You might correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen very little of that. And I think, again, at a structural level, that's not how machine learning is set up to operate. And so it'd be interesting. I'm really interested to see how that pans out, and whether there is a kind of a technical capacity to deal with the spread of distribution of answers in that way. I think, again, you run into this problem of representationalism, because are we saying then that if 3 or 40 people answer it in this way and we get some kind of distribution, that distribution is representative of society? And that's where I think those two things might come together, is that, of course, every individual's experiences cannot be represented in a data set. So what other approaches to modeling might start to complicate the model in such a way that we're not looking for an answer, we're not looking for a gold standard that is somehow representative of a population, that maybe there are new ways of modeling that deal with contestation of answers, that deal with uncertainty. And yeah, this is something HCI has a lot to say on, is how do you represent uncertainty? And I think AI and machine learning don't really have that yet. You know, they've dealt with explainability to some extent, but uncertainty and disagreement is something that they don't really structurally have the capacity for.
It's kind of builds on Paul's thing, but when I was hearing you talk about the neural project, it really struck in my head this sort of classic epistemological debate between qualitative and quantitative, right? That like on one end you have the deductiveness of quantitative research that is completely what we believe data science may actually be today. But in many ways, there's a whole range of possibilities for the sort of inductive type of logic that we become so used to in qualitative research now, right? That the answer of a sort of theory could simply just be like going back to those principles and thinking, we're not looking for one answer, we're looking at generating theories from the margins, right? Which is classically what qualitative work does. Yes. And I think if you maybe took that more, you know, maybe brought that in a little bit, we could actually expand the whole notion of data science more than just finding the ground truth.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way of putting it. What I don't want to do is set us up in that same, that precisely that conversation again, where there's no way out, is there? But I think in the way you described it is the right one, which is how do we bring that into a logic in which data science is familiar and comfortable with? How do we deal with diversity and kind of a much more positive sense of experience that somehow inject that into data science? And that, yeah, that's very much the way I'm trying to approach this now, and the work that's being myself involved in is working with data scientists. I think others have become a part of their practice, as opposed to saying yet again, oh, qualitative is different to quantitative. That's just not helpful, as you said, construction.
Yeah, I guess building on that, I mean, have you thought about, like with tasks like this, what are the types of tasks you think this is useful for? Because I can imagine there's sort of, you know, simplistically a spectrum of like, you know, are you just labeling whether or not something is a noun, you know, where you're actually really trying to actually get consensus versus what other types of questions or constructs that like something like a diverse this would actually be needed for?
So there is this sense in data science that there are, or machine learning modeling like this, that there are some questions that have an objective answer to them. And while there may be, that immediately invites the question for me is where's the gray space? And I think, maybe there are things like this is an noun, this is a verb, etc., where sometimes maybe, and clearly there's been a huge amount of progress in that in natural language processing. But the kinds of examples we were looking at were where human discretion and subjectivity are involved. Clearly, that's where kind of problems start to arise. And I would say, even in those areas, so one of the things that gets used is the idea of expertise. Medical imaging, the expert trumps everything else. But even in those conditions, experience matters to a huge degree. And so, you know, in medical practice, we all know that other people get invited into a conversation to make decisions on whether something's cancerous or something like that. And so that question of what kind of data are we talking about? Is it objective data or is it subjective data? I think closes off the conversation too soon. We just need to be open to the fact that so much of what we decide on has discretion involved in it. Even those things that might appear to be at first glance to involve objectivity. And so again, I don't want to get caught up in kind of, is the law always subjective or not? It was just sort of debate. I do want to think, let's keep ourselves open at first to thinking about subjectivity and its role in decision making.
wondering, is it important who or what is displayed? So it seems like with the HoloLens example, TH, like the presence of HoloLens, like TH changes the behavior of the shape, the head or classmates changing their behavior, but in both cases, technology presence change students. Instead of really think about it,
Yeah, yeah.
that directionality.
So I do think in the case of TH, he did have some agency there. He came to kind of construct this different way of interacting with the world. So, yeah, one simple answer is it is bidirectional. However, I think, and maybe this is what you're getting at, certain people and certain things in the world, actors, I would call them, but they don't have to be human, are exerting an undue influence on what's happening. And that's exactly the paper that I want to write about this project, because Cecily, who you saw at the table, who is a great dear friend and colleague, who is still at Microsoft, she has been highly rewarded for this work and her involvement in disability studies. Her son is blind, and she has a very strict, not strict, kind of pointed idea of what a young boy, in her case it was his son, how he should behave in relation to the world. That in her case, she wants her son to interact to some extent with a normative set of values around social interaction. And so in the case of TH, prior to wearing the Hololens system, he would talk to people like this. And one of the reasons he explained to us is I hear better because everything resonates through the table. But Cecily was always determined to get him and her son to orient to the world like many of us are doing here. That to listen is to be oriented to the speaker rather than to put your head on the table. And so there is, if you like, a normative value that's being kind of embedded in that technology. One of to pay attention is to sit up and to face the speaker. And yet, with TH, should we be enforcing that? Because actually, maybe he is better with his head on the table. And so that is what but it's a tricky territory to write about. It's not, and I'm not sure if it's a territory in which HCI would be interested in. It'd be something I'd probably write in disability studies to think about how these technologies do enforce norms. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, if I may follow up on that. When you were showing it, I was wondering, like, why is it head mounted?
Yeah.
Why don't you give him a whole bunch of sensors and let him see behind him and
Yeah.
do better than
Yes.
do better than everybody else? And so was that part of the goal? Was to sort of force him to interact?
Yeah.
By looking at.
Yes. I think I had these discussions with Cecily and with the development team. So we worked, this again, this is an exemplary case that you rarely see in kind of research labs in which machine learning, computer vision, HCI, social science groups all working together. And we worked together for 3 years and we still came out of it friends. And so in that sense, it worked well, but in precisely this way, my feeling was, what are we doing to TH? What are we reinforcing? And what kind of norms might we be thinking about differently? And maybe to speak specifically to my kind of publication of kind of this expansive idea of being human, being attentive to the world, why didn't we do something radically different? And I think, yeah, I don't want to kind of retell history in a way that may not be true, but I felt like I was compelled to think, yeah, let's try something else. But the conservatism of how we should attend to the world and demonstrate our attention outweighed that. And so again, I think that is something to be kind of discussed and think, what other kind of pressures are being exerted to limit our imaginations?
Maybe what we need is the technology for everybody else. Cued into what TH was thinking.
Yeah, so that was one of the outcomes was, might there be some kind of feedback that was about, well, what is he attending to? Yeah, that's a tricky one to.
So we've done smartphones and we created a generation of people who aren't talking. We need to start to articulate or think about what are some downsides that might happen if you created a cyborg that can look behind them or is just connected with such technology. Are there challenges that you foresee?
Oh God. I got them kids and I'm just like, they're just at that point where they kind of start to use their license. I'm like, no, don't do this to them. Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And I suppose for me, it would be about, ironically saying this, but about diversity of devices where we're not just locked to a mobile phone screen, but we're using many things in a rich variety of ways. But, you know, I don't want to kind of read it. But I think that it's such an important thing that we can neglect to think about because we don't necessarily think society is in a great place to think about it.
Well, join me in thanking Alex for his talk. We do have in an hour Jay's talk in the founders room.